All right, let's jump back into canning. Super simple one today, but something that I have been looking to do for several years. And this is at my husband's request. He wanted some cocktail onions. He loves those little things that come in the jar, the little cocktail onions. Sometimes they go in a martini, maybe twice a year he'll have a martini, but mostly he just likes to eat them, right? I like to put them on platters and things if we're having friends over, maybe with some cornichons and some pickled hot cherry peppers, maybe some sun-dried tomatoes, or put them on a little skewer. I'm going to put up, as we go through today, I'm going to put up several pictures of different ways they can be used, and anything that comes with a recipe, I will put that link down below. So I think this is going to be a fun thing to have on the shelf, not something every canner is going to have on their shelf. But when you go to buy those little jars these days, they're like $5. So that to me seems kind of crazy for him to eat a couple of onions and then, then what, right? So then they just float around the refrigerator. So now I'm going to have some small jars on hand for whenever he feels like a cocktail onion or wants to turn a martini into a Gibson, which, by the way, neither one of us knew that that's what that was. And then if I want to put some on a platter, another thought I had was that if there are any left kind of floating around the refrigerator, I can turn them into a salad dressing. I like to make a shallot vinaigrette dressing, and I think that if I drain those onions, they would be delicious in that. So in looking up my brine ratio on this, which is the vinegar to water ratio on this, I found a recipe from the National Center for Home Food Preservation, pickled pearl onions, which is exactly what they are. And so it gives me their suggested pickling brine. I'm going to change it just a little bit because they, for some crazy reason, put in 2 cups of sugar. To me, certainly if you're going to have a martini, you don't want sugar sweet pickles in your martini. But I don't even want them on like a cocktail skewer that I put on a board or something I mix in with some cornichons or hot peppers, or I don't know. The sugar doesn't really make a lot of sense to me in this, but if you would like your pickled onions to be sweet, it has sugar in there. So as far as preservation goes, we ought to talk about sugar for a second. What sugar does in a water breath canning recipe is it helps preserve the color. So, in this case, I'm using white pickled onions. So it'll keep them, kind of a crisper white for longer. The other thing that sugar does in a water bath canning recipe is help maintain the structure of whatever fruit or vegetable that you have in this vinegar brine. So, vinegar likes to break things down. Sugar will help it hold together a little while longer. So I think these are going to be such a novel thing to have on the shelf that I'm not worried about them being on there for so long that they start to break down. I know that I will certainly use them when we, start getting outside and entertaining again this spring when the weather clears up. We're doing so much more entertaining at home at each other's homes than we are going out these days. So I think it's really fun to kind of make it special and dress up a little board, or, if the guys want to do their martini drinks, we can put together a board with olives and I don't know, what else do you put in martinis? A twist and the little pearl onions, and I think it'll be a whole lot of fun. So I'm not worried about that at all. So several years ago, my husband asked me to make some of these, and I said, okay, fine. And then I proceeded to look whenever I was in the grocery store, and I'm not in the grocery store very often, maybe once every month or two. I'm generally a Costco and a farmer's market shopper. So I had not seen them, and I was walking through Sprouts a couple of days ago and did a whoa, there they are. So they only had 3 packages. The recipe calls for 4. I'm just going to do 3, and I'm going to cut all of the measurements down appropriately, and that's going to be just fine. So we need the white pearl onions. We need some celery seed. And by the way, feel free to mix up these spices. If you want to put pickling spice in there, if you want to put peppercorns in there, whatever you want to put in there is absolutely fine. I'm going to use mustard seed, and then David likes things spicy, so I think I'm going to use some red pepper flakes. These are not in the recipe. The other thing you're going to need is some, it calls for canning salt. So I have canning salt. I also have regular white salt that has not been iodized. As long as you use salt that has not been iodized, you're fine. If you use iodized salt, you're going to end up with a very cloudy murky, funny looking jar. So go for non-iodized salt. Now I might normally use pink Himalayan salt or real salt or whatever, but since I'm doing white onions and I want them to stay nice and clear, I'm going to stick with the white salt, and I did happen to have some canning salt. So I'm going to do that. You also need white vinegar, 5% acidity on your white vinegar. So be careful. At some point, I think some companies are making 4%. You can't can with that, and keep the pH level appropriate for water bath canning. So 5% acidity on the vinegar. And then you're going to need some water and, you know, your tools, right? So I have 7 little half-pint jars in my steam canner here, and they are coming up to temperature, and they are going to sterilize in the steam canner, get nice and hot. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is peel these onions. Now, these can be a bit of a bear to peel, so we are going to just dip them in some hot water for maybe 30 seconds, and then I'm going to take them out and plunk them in some cold water for about 30 seconds, and then I'll show you how easy they're going to be to peel. All right, so I'm going to get these out of the little cover. So the recipe specifically says to use the little white onions, but they also come as yellow onions and purple onions. And frankly, things that look like this sometimes come out of my garden if I don't space my onions properly. So that might be another thing to do if we have some onions that don't quite get as large as you'd like them to be. This would be a fun thing to do with them. My steamer is steaming the jars, so they're going to be ready to go as soon as I am. My water is almost up to a gentle boil here. And then I have a bowl of ice cold water, so just some cold tap water and some ice floating around in it. Then I have an empty and dry bowl with a colander in it. So they're going to go in the water for about 30 seconds, in the cold water for about 30 seconds, and then they'll go into here while I get everything done. So if you're a new canner, or maybe you're thinking of becoming a canner, or maybe you're not sure you really want to can at all, but you sure would like to get some of these cocktail onions on your pantry shelf, there is no need to go buy a canner. You don't need a steam canner. You don't need a water bath canner. All you need is a stock pot that is tall enough to have enough water to cover the jars by a couple of inches and to be able to have enough room to get to a rolling boil. And you need a towel or a trivet of some sort on the bottom. I will link a video I did up above about how to make a free canner. And that's all you need. You don't have to commit anything to canning just to do this one recipe. So these little skins start to come loose just the way you would see the tomato skins start to come loose if you were going to peel your tomatoes in a boiling water method. So that's all we're doing here. Get those in for 30 seconds while I get another batch of onions in. I'll make sure that these stay covered by the water. Make sure that these get down, chilled out. So while this is a hot pack, we are going to heat these through in the brine. My goal isn't to necessarily cook them, but I don't want to have raw onions that I'm serving my guests either. So I want a little bit of cooking, and then the rest is going to be taken over by pickling. And we should end up with a perfect texture for an onion that is pleasant to eat, not mushy, and yet certainly not raw. Okay. Ooh, that burner is a little hot. Okay, get the last batch in, and then we'll be ready to peel these. I'm going to turn this pot off and then rinse it out. I'm going to use the exact same pot for the pickling brine. We'll heat that up, and then once I get all of the onions peeled and ready to go, they'll go in the brine, and I'll just bring them up to a boil, let them simmer for a couple of minutes, and then we will jar them up. Okay. All right, while those cool off, I'm going to get this washed up. All right, let's get the brine gently heating up. very gently because it's going to take me a couple of minutes to peel those onions. So this is my white vinegar. Now, as I said, I'm not following the directions exactly because I only had, or Sprouts only had 3 packages of the pearl onions, and the recipe is for 4 packages of the pearl onions. So I'm going to link the original recipe below, and if you only end up with 3 packages or 2 packages, or you just want to try it, then you just make the adjustments as you go. And then that was a little bit of water. So we'll let that heat very gently. Get these out of the cold water, and let's go see how we do peeling them. Okay, let's get these peeled up. And we're supposed to cut off the tip. And then look at that. It just squeezes right out. I'm going to cut off the other end as well. Some of them are squeezing easier than others. So if yours doesn't squeeze, just peel it like you normally would. There we go. Perfect little onion. We live in a neighborhood where all the homes are very close together. All the neighbors are super friendly. You'll be walking up and down the street and somebody invites you to come join them on their porch. And we like to be able to invite folks over anytime we feel like it, basically, which means I want to be able to offer them something, even something little. I don't care if it's cheese and crackers and some little pickles and pickled onions, or if I'm going to do, a real spread and put everything on skewers and that kind of stuff. But I just think it's nice to be able to say, we're so glad you're here and I'm ready for you. So do you like to entertain at home? I feel for a while that we kind of got out of that, and we were going out with friends and that kind of thing. And the only thing we really did at home was invite people over for a barbecue. But these days, I don't know whether it's, the economy or what's going on in the world, it just feels more appropriate sometimes to just invite people over and just enjoy being together and have a good time. And we don't have to go out to some dinner. If somebody drops by, or say you just kind of last minute, well, if you're married to my husband, last minute can be anytime he walks out the front door, he can come home with neighbors. But anyway, in that case, what would you serve people? Might be kind of a fun resource for folks. So out of your pantry, and I don't care whether it is store-bought pantry or home canned pantry, somebody showed up, what would you serve them? Give me some ideas down below, because I'm always looking for new things to put out. And if there's something else that I can keep on my shelf to be ready, I would like to do that. We're all done here. So I have about 4 cups of these, and that is out of 3 of the 8-ounce packages. So I'm going to put these into the brine, which is gently boiling over here. And we'll give them just maybe 3 or 4 minutes in there, bring it up to a boil, and then give it 3 or 4 minutes to kind of simmer. And then we'll load up the jars. I'm going to clean up my mess, and I'll be right back with a clean work surface. All right, so while we're waiting on those onions, let's get the jars out and get all of our spices in there. I'm going to add a little water to this because it's been going for quite a while. All right, so let that come back up to temperature. And let's put this in here. Now I'm going to put half a teaspoon of red pepper flakes in each of these. You don't have to put any, as I said. All right, I'll just do 7 for now. I'm going to put 2 teaspoons of mustard seed in each jar. Now, as I said, you can certainly use pickling spice instead. You can put in peppercorns, you can put in cloves and cinnamon if you want. All right, so I put in 2 teaspoons of mustard. The recipe actually calls for 1 teaspoon because it's done by the pint. So it would be 1 teaspoon, but I don't mind extra mustard seed. So I'm going to do half a teaspoon of celery seed in each of these. Okay, these onions have done their time in the hot brine. Let's get them into the jars. We're going to pack them with a 1-inch headspace on the onions, and then we're going to fill them up to a 1/2-inch headspace with the pickling brine. These are just going to process. If your altitude is below 1,000 feet, they're just going to process for 10 minutes in a water bath canner, and then you let them sit for 5 minutes, and then you can take them out. Now I'm using the steam canner, so I'm going to process them for 10 minutes, and then I'm going to leave the lid on and let them sit for another 5 minutes after I've turned the burner off, and then I can remove them. I'm not going to get very many of these jars, maybe 4 or 5. I've got 1 left in there, so what I'm going to do is start filling with the brine, and then we will debubble and see which jar could best use it. All right, let's debubble and see where we end up. There will be some float in these because they're not fully cooked, so they will shrink up a bit in the jar and float up. But that is just to be expected if you're not packing something that is fully cooked. All right. I can actually use 2 of them. I think what I'm going to do is put this one in here. Add just a smidge more brine in a couple of these. Even though we didn't add any sugar in these, we did add all these little spices, which can get stuck on the rim and then cause your jar not to seal. So let's make sure that we get all of this cleaned up. Particularly that little celery seed can wind up there on the edge. Some lids ready to go. If you need some new lids, these are 4 jars lids. I have a link down below that'll get you 10% off if you use my code. I always appreciate those of you who I know every single time you need lids. I know you go there, and I really appreciate it. Okay, we're going to get our lids on, our rings on. And just go till it catches, and then just a smidge further. That's what we call finger tight. Those of you who have not done this before, this was a very easy recipe. I mean, obviously you saw what was involved. Very, very easy. Ingredients I had in the pantry except for the onions. And the only time-consuming part really was peeling those onions. But I think it's going to make for a beautiful jar. See all those spices floating around? All right, I'm going to get these in the steam canner, and I'm going to set the timer for 10 minutes. And then I'm going to turn off the burner and leave the lid on because I'm using the steam canner. If you're going to do it in a water bath canner and you're below 1,000 feet, you put it in for 10 minutes, turn off the heat, and then remove the lid and let it sit in there for 5 more minutes. Now, I always have in the description or the notes from my video, I always have the conversion chart for what to do if you are above 1,000 feet. So be sure you go check that out if your altitude is above 1,000 feet. Okay, I'll give that a second to get back up, and then I'm going to start my timer, and I'll meet you back here when we're done. Okay, so I've started my timer now that I'm up in the right zone for my steam canning. But I wanted to show you, I took the rest of the brine, which now has the onion flavor in it, put it in these little jars just with some used lids. I'm going to stick these in the fridge, and then I have some Brussels sprouts in the refrigerator. I think I'm going to slice those maybe into quarters and do like a refrigerator pickle on those, just so I get to use all of this. Okay, my timer has gone off. As we wrap this up today, I wanted to say thank you so much for being here. And I hope that if you give these a try, you'll let me know. Give me your ideas on what you serve if somebody pops in unexpectedly, or even if you plan a party. What kind of appetizers do you put out? I'm always looking for new items and certainly new things I can put on the shelf. So I'm always ready with something fun and creative. I will look for ways to use them, and David will certainly go buy some vodka. I think that vodka, gin, I don't know, whatever you make a martini with, that's what he'll go get, and I'm sure he'll make a martini as soon as, or a gimlet. No,